The Cinq Association, the city's hub for duelists on demand. With a simple contract, you can hire one of these madcap musketeers to fight in your stead, whether it's for self-defense or the most flamboyant public execution money can buy. So with that in mind, why the hell do we need them? No, seriously, think about it. They're the only association that has to go to the streets to get jobs. You can legally hire one Cinq fixer to kill another one, and most importantly, just about everything they're hired to do can be done better by their contemporaries. And yet, there is no better association for you to work for, specifically if you're a theater kid. It's just that if you consider everything that goes into running a dueling office, the Cinq quickly becomes the most whack-ass amongst the 11 currently known associations. So today, let's go over what it takes to be a Cinq fixer, their job, their fighting style, and most importantly, if you would have any future among their ranks. But if you want me to keep it simple, being a Cinq fixer boils down to being helpful, stylish, and accessible. And a really good analogy I can use for this is today's sponsor, Opera GX. Listen! Any good Cinq streamer knows that a chunk of their viewers are gonna have them on the side. And that's why Opera has a video pop-out feature that allows you to go to another tab and keep them in your line of sight. It'll be easy to find exactly what you're looking for without finessing pop-ups with their built-in ad blocker too. Or for instance, let's say you banned a member of the middle and don't really want to be tracked easily. Well, Opera's got you there too with their built-in VPN that can set your location well beyond the borders of any nest. But now that we're past the help, let's talk about the style. Just like the Cinq, Opera GX can come in several forms, especially if you make use of their mod store. Now, I've personally downloaded these 3 Limbus Company, Library of Rhoda, and Lobotomy Corp mods for reasons I don't believe I need to explain. Now, what I wish the Cinq had was the ability to mix and match their styles across different branches. You know, like how you can mix and match the background, splash screens, and sound effects of all the different Opera GX mods. Or, you know, if you want to be more low-key, you can always turn them off on the side. And just like the Cinq, Opera GX wants to be accessible to everyone. That's why the Cinq comes to you, and why Opera GX imports all of your history and bookmarks over to it, so it's an easy time getting them at your service. So if it's all that easy, go ahead and enlist Opera GX to be at your service by using the link in the description and the pinned comment below. But now that I've thrown the gauntlet, how about we see what the actual Cinq fixers are made of? And as always, let's start with the facts. Unlike many factions, the vast majority of our information on the Cinq comes from 6 stories, Dante's notes, and a budding Twitch streamer. So while there are bound to be gaps that will need some filling later, all 6 the IDs show us what the Cinq are like in a duel. So we'll start with exactly how those work. Unlike fights with other combat associations, the Cinque's duels are made out in the open with consent from all parties, and usually are one-on-one affairs. Every Cinque-sanctioned duel starts with one combatant in a fight asking them to take their place. As such, this can either be a pre-planned duel, like with how Merceau scheduled all of his duels in his U3 story, a walk-in where someone declares a duel without warning, like against Sinclair, or a mid-fight contract like in East Don Quixote's U3 story. In fact, now that we have the new Honglu, we can add revenge duels to the list. That said, the Cinque reserve the right to add an extra convenience fees as they see fit. Mid-fight contracts cost double, but from Honglu alone, we can add on rush fees, which would be a short-term duel for a planned or unplanned fight for 3.7 times as much. Then if you're a mid-match mute, you could even use your palm to non-verbally request help for 1.5 times the usual fee. Oh, and there's a charge for them being hired while on lunch. Hell, at this rate, the list of potential Cinque fees might be as long as the whole damn Book of Vengeance. And until we get lore proving otherwise, this means I have every reason to believe a Cinque fixer would stake out a Black Friday event in case someone wants to get into a fight over the last discounted Stigma Workshop sword. From there, they can charge double, do it a couple more times with other people that really want some special workshop item, and be set for the month. And for good measure, maybe they'll split it with an Oofy fixer since those guys sometimes notarize these duels. Said duels also come in different levels. As of writing, there are 3 which represent levels of intensity. First, we've got level 3 duels, which are simple. It's not over until you meet Merceau's mom. And while we don't have exact definitions for the other 2, we do have other examples of duels that have their own rules we can infer from. For instance, in Kanto 7, we have an example of what a level 2 duel may be. Early on, Don Quixote has a little parasocial outburst that leads her to get into a duel with Camille from the West Cinque Association. While he initially describes this as a duel to the death, none of the combatants actually die from it. Admittedly, this is a gray area since Dante comments that Don's wounds may be fatal, but since she didn't die before Dante turned the clock and Camille willfully stopped once Dawn gave up and talked like he was bullying her instead of killing her, it feels like he wasn't truly dead set on that outcome. Because of that, I'm inclined to say a level 2 duel is a fight until one party either can't or won't continue to fight, but not necessarily to the death. I am also inclined to say it because Honglu asks someone to give up a level 2 duel in his voice lines, but we already edited this part first, so we take those. And then lastly, the best case for a level 1 duel is in Cinq Merceau's U3 story, where the duel's decided by whose sword touches whose body first. Granted, Merceau makes the most of these stabs by piercing them on the edge of a fatal spot, but still, he follows the rules, doesn't fund the funeral industry, and doesn't wait for them to submit. It's the bare bones of a duel, but a duel nonetheless. Now that being said, if you're gonna base your livelihood on stabbing people with consent, you need to make it clear when you're going to start. That's why the Cinq has their own series of traditions and rituals, the main one we're aware of being of how they start a duel. The South and West Cinq throw their gauntlets at their opponent to declare a duel, though some may forsake that option for one reason or another. But the East Cinq take a more formal approach, stating their name and affiliation before getting into combat. You can even skip this if someone requests for your help by palm instead of by mouth, at least for the first hit. And while we're at it, the Cinq may not be allowed to intervene in a duel without any client's consent, but they are absolutely allowed to defend themselves from being collateral in someone else's fight. If anything, Cinq fixers might be considerate to a fault because they even offer to find a weapon of choice for their duel opponent, and I quote, "Just be aware that requesting a weapon you think is impossible to procure is not a way out of the duel. Whichever type of weapon you choose, we'll be sure to get it for you." Now, I'm sure they're talking about some kind of general weapon welfare, but I'd love to see what happens if there's a request for a relic like Lavatane or even just their own burnin' bangles. Like the rest though, I have to imagine it comes with a fee, and once the duel is ended, everything's forgiven. Much like historical duels, the Cinque's rules to let bygones be bygones after everything's said and done. Granted, that's probably easiest in level 3 duels like Cinq Sinclair's, where all that was left of his appointment was a gray matter stain on the training floor. And I certainly don't envy who had to clean that up. Thankfully for any potential Cinq janitors though, most jobs they get don't come into their office. In fact, they get so few jobs that one of their more noteworthy tasks is to participate in joint conferences and events with other associations. But nah, these guys ain't that lucky, they gotta seek out work. Which leads us to... Listen, let's imagine you're on the street, and I walked up to you in my jousting pants and said, "Hey, I'll stab that guy in the leg for only $49.99. By the way, he'll know I asked you to do it, and I'll make sure it happens in broad daylight. What do you say?" You'd probably call the fucking head on me before you'd pay me. This is the exact issue that the Cinq have that no other association deals with. I mean, say whatever you want about the Sheet, Lord knows I have. Subscribe for more well-thought-out faction slander. But their assassination jobs are a lot easier to pitch when you don't make them happen in a public setting. Hell, it may even be harder than I made it sound there. Cinq Dawn's itching to step into a fight in both of her U3 stories, but is forced to wait until she's invited. And since there's no instance, either in the IDs, nor in Kanto 7 of a Cinq fixer offering their services as a duel, I'm inclined to believe that they're forced to wait for someone to notice them first. And if that's the case, it explains a lot about the Cinque's most prominent trait, their outfits. Yes, every association has its own sort of fashion that acts as its branding. But aside from the West Zwei, the Cinq stand out the most out of any of their contemporaries. And unlike the Zwei, these outfits are purely for peacocking instead of a functional purpose. Seriously, you can't tell me that any outfit that forces you to wear a hat is made for practical reasons. Plus, the South and West branches seem to have more notoriety than the East. I ain't saying it's because of the outfits, but it is a notch in their favor. And just like any good cosplayer, the Cinq can only get that good exposure they rely on by going out into the public. That's why they hit the streets and look for any disgruntled folks in alleyways, bars, or wherever anyone can get into a scrap. It's a very direct, boots-on-the-ground method that is able to get these fixers some work. There might even be a knock-on effect with that practice. That Kazan the East Cinq are around, that place is notorious for always having fights. So it's up in the air if stuff breaks out because it's so close to the Cinq office, or if they just happen to set up shop there because of the Kazan. But, maybe that's too pessimistic. I mean, to their credit, Cinq jobs are often less intensive than the jobs of other associations. The For Glory one-on-one fights tend to be easy to end quickly in one way or another, especially since speed is all their game. This means that even if it takes 30 minutes of crawling the desks in the back streets, and we'll say a generous 30 minutes to handle a duel, that's still an average of 1 job per hour. Well, assuming they don't pay for a rider that extends the beating by an hour anyway. We'd still need to know the Cinc's rates to see if it pays well, and much as I love him, Honglu wasn't a perfect source on that. But considering that Dante's notes say that they don't get a ton of work due to duels going the way of corporism, and it doesn't seem like a lot. Of course, we're talking about before the fees bleed you dry like a Ferris wheel employee. However, there is one other way that certain West Cinq fixers have found to market themselves. Live streaming. And look, I know a lot of us did a double take when we saw Camille in Kanto 7, but as dumb as it sounds on the surface, I think Kim Ji-hoon was cooking here. You know how I mentioned that all the other associations have an easier time getting people to come to them like a business would? Well, a lot of those other associations would be pretty shit at live streaming their jobs too. Imagine you need to be protected from stalkers and hired as Vi bodyguard. The last thing you would want is them to be constantly yapping and broadcasting your location. The Liu Association? Maybe on small jobs that works. But anyone known for making their fights public might have trouble getting the larger all-out war contracts that the Liu is known for. And no self-respecting she-fixer assassin is going to get the lighting setup they'd need to show what they're made of. Some other associations might be able to pull that off, sure, but when your entire business model is based on making yourself a fighting spectacle, and yes, quite literally aura farming, why don't we get that word of mouth going, baby? I mean, just look at the blue-haired prick with a selfie stick. Whatever your thoughts on his personality, the South and East Cinq are hitting the streets like door-to-door salesmen selling vacuums, while Kemi's a regular on magazines, the Cinq representative for the La Mancha Land takedown, and in the top 10 both of the up-and-coming new generation fixers and fixers I want to have dinner with. And you could say the same of his Merceau ID counterpart. While this man's able to nail and impale 5 duels at once, he only got into streaming to get more objective feedback on his form. So yeah, in this case, it was a happy accident. But still, I'm sure both the headquarters and the Cinq PR department in the West took note. The only question on my mind is when the Cinc's gonna start shilling some discount life insurance that'll inevitably cancel them. All we can say for now, though, is that the Cinq have to get more creative than most other associations when it comes to getting jobs and staying afloat. But so long as they can keep getting results, living in the limelight works for them. So then, once they have the crowd, how exactly do they fight in it? In more ways than you might think. In fact, depending on what you'd call a fighting style, there are anywhere from 3 to 5 different strategies on how they handle combat. Broadly speaking, all of the Cinq units have 2 traits in common. They get buffed by being faster, and have their own dueling mark that gives them buffs by believing in the Cinq style of monogamy. That is 1 Cinq fixer per target, and 1 target per Cinq fixer. Non-Cinq IDs don't have to worry about this, of course, they're not orthodox, but for duelists, no tagging in and out or taking breaks until death do you part. But all 3 quadrants of the Cinq we know of have a distinct way of playing in this framework. So how about we make like a natural disaster and start by hitting up the South?
Everyone in McKinney is dead.
The Southern Cinq Association are the branches that are the most dedicated to using speed, haste, and bind for their duels. South Cinq Don Quixote, Sinclair, and Otis all have their declared duel theme status that allows them to get more haste the more they commit to stabbing a single target over and over. As put in Otis's U3 story, she manages the distance between herself and her opponent as her main strategy, and that maneuvering and footwork is key to her victory. Don Quixote, though, takes it to a greater extreme. While Sinclair and Otis may both use poise, Dawn is all about haste and relies the most on getting fast enough for her attacks to hit the hardest. A lot like her base and Shi IDs, funnily enough. Then Otis acts much more like a conventional poise unit. She generates the potency, the count, and gets buffs from the speed. She's the most by-the-numbers strategy for the Cinq, and that's okay because she's a 2-0 that talks like she's a 4-0. And then we get to Sinclair, who almost acts like a charge unit. Like with several Sinclairs, this one doesn't like being too violent, and most of his skills are about building poise count with no potency to speak of. But then, like a sleeper agent who hears any of these words, he suddenly goes from 0 to 60 at his skill 3 and turns all of that poise count into potency, hitting more on crit and throwing on fragile for good measure. I mean, hell, the guy challenging him was lucky that Egg Boy here didn't need all 3 coins to end him and could just pierce his skull in a single strike. Overall, the South Cinq are the ones who are most dedicated to speed and the concept of a duel, but when we get to the West, these guys are more about the fundamentals. The 2 examples we have of the West Cinq both can inflict the focused attack status, which is their equivalent to the South's declared duel. The main difference here is that they have to target the specific slot instead of just the unit or part. That, of course, is on brand considering that West Merceau hit each of his targets where it would hurt the most in his U3 duel, and while restrictive, this status is the only one of the three that will give the Inflictor additional coin power. Beyond that though, our streaming stranger here is also able to inflict Rupture and has that classic short-lived 15-3 rule for it. For anyone that doesn't remember, there was a time where Project Moon tried to balance Rupture by letting units not eat the stack of it on hit, but also not inflict more so long as they reached a high enough potency and count. In lore terms, you could consider this reliable damage a greater reward for staying on the target like the Cinq want to. And then like the Southern Cinq, he gets stronger the faster he is. With enough poise, he can get that haste to make it happen too. However, the West doesn't prioritize speed or haste nearly as much as the South. They're very much more focused on precision for the best reward. That said, you might have noticed that I haven't talked much about the rosy-faced fencer in this section yet. And that's because Camille, for every bit of extra that he is a special case because he has all of the skills of the South and West Cinq combined. Yeah, we may only get to see a live duel of his for roughly 4 turns, but he's got every single little benefit. Haste, bind, poise, rupture, focused attack, dual declared, Sinclair's fragile, and even that little Dawn SP heal that she has on her South ID. All of that is on one man's, which no current ID can say they have. So it makes me think that Camille's gotten around a bit as a member of the Cinq, which, you know what, good for him. And the same could be said of our final example. If the South gets advantage through their speed and the West through their precision, then the East is all about hitting those sweet, sweet pressure points. Or at least they're the most open to it. Unlike the South and the West, the East Cinq allow their fixers to use several kinds of fighting styles without having to use a rapier. I'm sure this means that if we get another East Cinq ID that we're gonna see more variety in how they fight, but the main traits we've been told are common to the East Cinq are that they're able to inflict burn through a material called Virescent Pyrojade, and they're able to inflict the Nerve Strike status. Starting with our Sizzling Stones, while the material is mainly an excuse to light Dawn's gauntlets and the opponent on fire, the Virescent Pyrojade is capable of allowing the user to choose what does and doesn't get burned. It's useful enough that I'm surprised that the Liu isn't in on this, but it's damn cool to see the Cinq get a hold of something that flashy. And then the Nerve Strike is best described as a cross between the declared duel and focused attacks. To get its best effects, East Cinq Dawn only needs to dedicate attacks to the specific unit instead of one of their specific slots. And the more she does it, the stronger she gets. The trade-off is that the buffs aren't as strong since she only gets base power instead of more coin power, but hey, it's good enough that in the East Cinq, all you gotta do is get into a good boxing tempo instead of specifically going for the gut punch. And that's because with the Nerve Strike, every punch you make is gonna feel like it's to the gut. Or worse. Chiquita's skills have more of a focus on negative effects than the other branches and makes use of defense level down, inflicting more the more Nerve Strike is on the target. I like to think of it as being able to screw with the enemy's tension so that they have trouble moving, and then hurt them more when they do get hit afterward. That combined with the Nerve Strike, Poise, and Burn all contributing to dealing more damage on crit means that this variant of the Cinq is much more aggressive than any of the others. And of course, she gets benefits from being faster than the opponent like anyone else. And then Honglu's gameplay is very much the same, but treats inflicting Nerve Strikes like an addiction. Sure, Dawn's got her own set of benefits, but Honglu's here gets not only coin power and poise from Nerve Strike, but also clash power and the ability to reuse coins. At his peak, he easily outpaces Dawn even if she wasn't banned from the bar. The trade-off though is that, like any addict, he's weaker when running raw and has fewer coins by default. But then again, he does thrive on attention when other Cinq allies are watching him, and that does include their corpses. Witnessed Eastern Cinq will let him get more poise and poise count if there are enough other Cinq nearby that aren't on the field. And based on his uptie story, my best guess for why this works is because the guy has a lot to prove with how much his coworker screwed up at the bar. Overall, while each of the Cinq have their own specialties that sometimes bleed into each other, they all rely on running circles around their opponents and knowing how to look good while doing it. Again, whether it's in an alley, a crowd, or online, you're gonna have at least one audience member that will see you eat shit when you fall down. And for the Cinq, well, that's a fate almost worse than death. And on the topic of them dying, let's return to our main question. Do we really need the Cinq Association? Let me put it to you this way. If we take the Cinq as they've been defined, an association that's based on the tradition of dueling, then no, I don't think so, at least. In my eyes, the Cinq are a lot like a Starbucks. They only get as much work as they do because they're everywhere and we're the first to use some modern marketing gimmicks. Sure, they can do the job and specifically duel better than any other association, but unless we get another ID or character that reveals a lot more, the association's gonna go under the moment people stop thinking duels are a good way to settle arguments. If that comes to pass, though, it may not be so bad. In fact, it may not even put the current Cinq fixers out of a job. Clearly, they're capable fighters. The Eastern Cinq may even be able to ingrain themselves in the Liu Association without much issue. And I could see some of the other IDs managing alright as a 7 Association detective or an Ufi Association enforcer, since in these duels you need a certain level of a keen eye. Hell, maybe there's a branch of the Shi that could take them, since not all of them rely on slashing. The only other association that feels like a hard sell is the Zwei, since those guys are all about taking hits and may have bulkier weapons and armor. Either way, my point is that while the Cinq fixers are capable, the Cinq Association itself isn't poised to make itself as essential as the other ones, since they're closer to being a WWE circus on demand than a company with a real service. You know, like streamers and YouTubers. But at the same time, if we look past the whole dual fixation, the Cinq serve an actual purpose. In a way, they're kind of like aggressive Zwei fixers on demand. Like, the Starbucks bit is right, I stand by that, but no other association has been displayed taking a job so quickly as its regular day-to-day process. And of course, the trade-off to that is, considering that their clientele are folks in alleys or mid-scale bars and sometimes accept double the rate, again, I don't believe the Cinque's prices are that high. But what this means is that the Cinq is a whole association of fast food fixers. And I don't mean that as a dunk. In fact, embracing that is probably their best bet at getting more work if duels ever do die out. And if they want to prepare for that, just keep the association doing what it's already doing. They're already set on showing how qualified they are at fighting when the cameras are on anyway. Just make it easier for people to hire them after they see them on camera. Again, the other associations have so much more red tape and like to keep their matters much more private. So if, say, the Cinq had an app to contract them on demand, like Cinq Book, or Cinq Dash, or hell, Cinq Bank if you want to rhyme, they'd barely have any kind of competition, and they could keep up dueling without having to worry about their culture dying, killing their association. Then, sure, you might have to charge more for travel fees, service fees, convenience fees, appearance fees, and the rest. But more than any other association, a lot of their audience already has computers or PDAs of their own, so they're probably already interested in giving them a shot. I mean, it's not like Incenkification's led to any issues with other businesses before or been a horrible experience for the consumer, right? Or at least that's what I thought. Originally, I was going to leave it at the Incenkification bit, but with Hong Lu being announced midway through editing this video, it turns out the truth really is stranger than fiction. They kinda made that real. But even if most of the extra fees came from him, I did get a chance to look at my notes again and see that the Cinq, well, they offer a bit more than I thought. Don't get me wrong, they're still all acrobats and clowns in the circus, but that's kind of the point. Sure, duels are on the downturn, and there is a chance that a Cinq office actually increases the amount of violence in the surrounding area. But here's the deal. We may not need the Cinq, but we also don't need the circus. And I don't know about you, but I think the circus is kinda nice. Well, if you're not a crybaby, that is, but every other association we know is here for either essential important work or for convenience. Maybe if we take a second to strip off the cynicism, the people that get to watch these duels and are just around the area, they're having fun seeing the culture of dueling. And as funny as it is, maybe streaming it online is enough to keep that culture alive without adding any major shakedown fees. Well, you know, other than the ones that punish you for making a fight without a planner. In the end, no, even if they are useful for filling in some gaps other associations aren't perfect with, I don't think we need the Cinq. But in a place like the city, having one association that has the effect of getting people to be in a crowd on the regular, I feel like that's something to be at least a little grateful for. A little taste of humanity, camaraderie, a fucking reason for a third place. And despite all the flair, and especially after seeing Hong Lu, there really is some substance that goes with that show after all. And hell, if they really are committed to keeping dueling culture alive and are good enough to promise a payout on a loss, then maybe the Cinq really do have a right to be called an institution. Or at least they do until some rich sociopath hires every Cinq fixer for a death game and wipes the entire association off the map. That's still legal, by the way! Either way, thanks for checking this out. I've been thinking of a few new ways to spice up videos and get back into lore and highlights as a focus, so if this felt right to y'all, you know all the YouTube things to do. Also, I'm gonna be moving in a bit under 3 months, so if you've been waiting for a great time to support the channel through a literal transition, you can always become a member of the channel or hit up my Patreon to get access to these videos earlier than anyone else. For now though, hope you look forward to the rest that we got coming out this month as I've got a schedule again, and take care.